Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. Ladder Daily Digest celebrates creators of all kinds, whether authors or YouTubers. And today we have a brand new YouTuber from this year, Sheena Petersen. Welcome, Sheena, to the show.
Thank you, Jean. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so Sheena, tell us about your Mormon story, like a 5-minute Mormon story or something like that, that led you up to deconstructing.
Yeah, definitely. So, really, in a nutshell, what really did it for me was back when I was about 17, learning about polygamy for the first time. And
Mm,
that just never really set right with me. And even like throughout my life, from the time I was 17, I would always go back and try to figure out more and more about it to try to make myself feel better. I was looking for comfort surrounding that because, I mean, as anyone really knows, like marriage involves, you know, certain aspects of a relationship, and I just couldn't get over this idea that, the founding prophet and subsequent prophets were, having sex with multiple women. It just didn't seem right to me, and it never made sense to me that it was somehow okay that they were having sex with multiple women just because their first wife knew about it and just because they were married to them. And in my mind, I was
and,
like, I
and
just don't see how that's different from adultery. So that always bothered me. I always thought that as I got older and as I, grew in the church and gained, a stronger testimony, that it would finally eventually just make more sense and I would be at peace with it somehow. And so by the time I got married to my husband, I feel like that actually really exacerbated my issue because my husband's really great. And I was like, I just cannot fathom this idea that I would be having to share him in the next life. And then I finally got to a point where um, I just
and like
I couldn't
early
handle the
on,
idea.
all your
Mhm.
lessons as in primary and in seminary and Sunday school, that had never been discussed even, right?
No, no, not until, yeah, what really happened was my parents were separating and I lived with my dad and my brother, and he was very much still committed to the church. I mean, he still is today. But my mom had, she was the one that was like, I'm done here. Um, so she left and wanted wanted to take us kids with her, but yeah. So I mean, it was kind of a mess surrounding, this whole idea. But
And this is while you were
he
a
very
young teenager.
yes. So this happened when I was 15 or 16
Middle.
um when they decided to separate. And so when I ended up moving with my dad, mostly I think my motive was that I just wanted to get out of the city because I wasn't a city kid and I didn't enjoy being there at the time.
Oh, what
I mean, I
city was
loved
that?
we actually lived in Bellevue, Washington. So I mean, it's near Seattle. It's that area on the West
Mhm.
Coast. So there are a lot of cities over there, but yeah, it's very near Seattle. So I wasn't into it, and I wanted to go back to living in a smaller town. And my dad moved us up to the Panhandle of Idaho, and so we were living in Bonners Ferry, Idaho at the time, which I mean, I have no regrets about, the people that I met there and the relationships that I built with people there and, met my very best friend there. And so there was a lot of good that came out of going there. But um, he very much, my dad, had put this idea into our minds as kids that my mom had lied about a lot of things and that, just surrounding their marriage and how everything went. And hey, that's evidenced by the fact that look, she left the church, she's an apostate
Yeah.
now,
And be careful around
things
her.
like that. Yeah, exactly. And so, she had actually been the one to have she was the one who brought up polygamy, and I thought she was wrong because I was trained to believe and think that everything that came out of her mouth, like you had to really take that with a grain of salt. You had to be careful about the things that she said. And it was really like the opposite was true of her, is true of her. It's kind of sad to think that I didn't even really see my mother for what she was. So it was like, I always kind of liken my experience with like my parents and like their separation. It's actually really similar to my deconstruction because you have this person or this entity that's telling you one thing and they only want you to listen to them and believe only them, and they'll poison the well against anyone else or any other ideas. So it was actually fairly easy for me to recognize when I was going through my deconstruction that, oh my gosh, this is the second time I'm going through this, realizing that the person or entity that I've been listening to this whole time is really the one that's dishonest. So, which is really,
And it makes a lot of
unfortunate.
sense. If you, from a humanistic
So,
point of view, it would make sense
yeah,
that your dad would sort of want to keep what he has together still and
right.
shore up
Yeah,
and do what he thinks is protecting you, you know,
right. But he
and
did it
he,
in a dishonest way, and that really didn't help
I mean, do you think
when
he
you come
was
to realize that.
totally dishonest, or do you think he was just just repeating the party line of the church? You
No,
know what I'm
so a
saying?
lot of it wasn't. No, and I totally get that. He 100% believes in the church. So the things that he repeats from the church, he absolutely thinks are true. But the things that he would say about my mom and about, just a lot of different things outside of Mormonism, very much like it wasn't really related to Mormonism. So he had no real reason to be dishonest there other than that he wanted to control that narrative so that
Right.
way we would continue to believe him. I also give him grace because I mean I do love my dad. And I'm not trying to disparage him or anything, but it's more that it's just this pattern that I've noticed from my life. But it's more that, he I understand that he was going through, pain in that situation. And I just think that it's unfortunate when, you know, people and, organizations and stuff decide that, hey, the best route to keeping people loyal is to lie to them and withhold truths. And that was very much what happened in both cases. So I mean, it eventually comes back to bite you, and it
Right.
really did for him, and also for the church because I was like, yeah, this, you
And
should
you
have just been
you
honest and upfront.
you had grown up going into the church all the time. Did you have like
Yeah.
leadership positions as a beehive and Maya maid?
Yeah, so I was Laurel's president 3 times between a couple different wards. The only reason I was Laurel's president for like 2 more times was just because the ward that we lived in after we had actually moved out of Bonners Ferry into Montana, about an hour away, and the ward there was so small. There were literally only 3 of us Laurels, and so it was like a rotation we would just
Oh,
go through. So yeah, they kept me in for like a couple terms, I guess, if you will, as Laurel's president. But yeah, that was actually when I found out. Well, let's see. I know I was the Laurel's president in one of those wards at the time, but that was when I had found out about polygamy. My mom had come to visit us, and she took us camping, and with her boyfriend and his family, and and anyway, so yeah, like people were asking, his some of his family members were like asking my brother and I questions about the church. And so I was doing my Mormon duties and being a member missionary and trying to share the Joseph Smith story and all the things. And then my mom was obviously very uncomfortable, and she was like, yeah, and then there's the issue of polygamy. And I was immediately just mad, and I was like, no, you don't even know what you're talking about. I was like, that was only biblical, and that had nothing to do with Mormonism. And she was like, oh yeah. She was like, then why did your dad tell me that it did? And I was like, no, there's no way that he said that. And I was just like, I doubled down, and I was very much just like, no, she has to be lying about this. And I was so mad because I felt like she ruined this missionary moment for me, which was so ridiculous. But
right.
that was how that.
Satan was still controlling
Yeah.
her. She couldn't
Yep.
see your positive vibes, that your
Yeah,
spirit that
I
you were
know.
carrying.
Right? Yeah. I feel so bad about that. Now I've apologized to my mom about so many things later in life. She's like, she's like, I never held you guys accountable for any of that stuff. And she was like, that's, water under the bridge. She was like, you were just a kid. But it's funny. And my mom is a very forgiving person, and she is actually Christian as well. But like, she just, yeah, that was just not. She was like, no, you're my child, and like I knew what was going on, So it was kind of
Right.
funny, but I had taken that information home with me um, to talk to she ended up dropping me off at my best friend's house after that camping trip, and I stayed with them. I'm really, I was close with their family, and so I remember bringing it up in front of my best friend and her mom, and I was like, "Can you believe this?" I was like, and then she had the audacity to try to ruin this moment and say that Mormons practice polygamy, and my best friend's mom was like, "Well, actually," she was like, "They did," and I was like, what now? So she had to go through that, with us. And my best friend was like, what? So we were both sitting there, 16 and 17-year-olds for the first time, just learning about this and going,
So
wait a
actually,
minute. Like,
it's just dawning on me. You didn't think Mormons ever practice polygamy.
no, I had no idea. That was not on my radar.
You'd
No.
never seen a picture of Brigham Young's 67 wives all together
Mm-mm.
or anything like that.
No, no, never.
That
It was
that is
never brought
interesting.
up.
I actually was recently talking with some sister missionaries, and I mentioned polygamy, and they knew
Hmm.
about it, but they said, "Oh, that's just history. That's just, it's in the
Yeah,
past. We
it's
don't
that
do it
dismissive
anymore.
answer.
It's it's not doctrine." And I said, "Well, read
Uh,
Doctrine and Covenants section 132 all the way
132.
through, in
Yeah.
132 one sitting, and you'll know that it was doctrine. It is doctrine, you
It
know."
is doctor. It's still canonized in the scriptures. So,
Um,
yeah,
President Nelson has his two wives' pictures on the
yeah,
mantle a lot of times when he's, or his desk when he's, doing a presentation there, and he
yeah,
believes that he will have two wives once he
yep,
passes.
yeah. Same with
And
Oaks.
so,
Yeah,
yeah,
that was actually also an issue that it wasn't like a main issue when I was first struggling, but it was like I kept going, yeah, I mean, I really like President Nelson, and he has two wives. That really puts a damper on things, but I'm just gonna try to look past that. And yeah, that was always really hard for me. Because I was just like, okay, who am I kidding? Like, no, I don't really care for that at all. I don't care for the fact that he thinks that he's gonna have two women in the next life, and ick.
so this polygamy
Like,
issue, in a way, is at the time, it's just now it's something on your shelf, right?
oh yeah, yes, that was really
Now, is that the
the
first thing
only thing. Yeah,
and the only
for the
thing?
most part. For the most part, although I do have to say, ever since I was pretty young, and I was telling my husband this the other day, I was like, it's funny because I remember I have this one memory of, being a little girl at about 5 or 6 years old. And I remember there being like this primary program that was being put on, and we were in the chapel practicing. And I just remember there always being such an emphasis on the young men and on the boys. And I was just, when I was a little girl, I was like, I don't get it. Why do the boys get like this pedestal? Why are they always propped up? And of course, I wasn't thinking in those terms exactly. I was like 5 or 6, but you are
Looking back.
automatically, even as a child, like you have a sense for that stuff. It's kind of like little kids know when somebody doesn't like them. You can sense that. And as a
Mhm.
little child, I absolutely sensed that like women very much were not in charge. And that always bothered me ever since I was a little girl. It was something that became easier and easier to just kind of brush off, especially as you're raised in it and you just are like, well, this is the way it is, and you don't really think a whole lot
It's
about it. And of course, as children, like your mind isn't fully developed yet. And
it's
when
just the
you're
way
raised in
God
something,
wants it. It's a
yeah.
mystery.
So
We'll find out
yeah,
when we die why that is.
yeah, yeah,
Looking
exactly.
back
And
from
it just
in my own life, it was like the golden plates being taken away. I was probably 7 or 8, and thinking,
mhm.
so Joseph Smith had golden plates. Where are they? Oh, they were taken away by
I
an
asked
angel.
that. Yeah.
What?
Hmm.
I want to see a lot of gold in one place. I was a boy. I was learning about what money was. I wanted to see that value.
Yeah.
So anyways,
Yeah, I
it's
know.
similar, like we can look back and we find that there were little things, little on our shelves, but so
Yeah.
the polygamy was the big thing on yourself. But so what'd you do from there?
So yeah, like I said, I mean, throughout my life, I would kind of go back and try to figure out what the hell was actually going on, so that I could try to find answers. And then I just always felt like I came up short, and I was like, maybe I'm just not doing this right. I'm not being faithful enough. I'm not, because it's like that tendency to put it back on yourself. That's kind of how we're trained in the church. I've realized from so many other people's stories. I was like, oh gosh, I thought that was just me doing that, but that's literally like we're really trained to just be like, oh, it's a me problem. So yeah, I really thought that it was a me problem and that I just was not faithful enough. And I would go to church seeing all these women who seemed to just be okay. And even if it was touched on, it was like nobody really made a huge fuss about it. And I was like, I don't get it. Like, why am I going crazy inside? I feel like everybody else is
Right.
so calm about this. But anyway, so eventually when I met my husband and got married, that's when it really it
Oh,
really
let's go
ramped up
back
for me.
a second.
Yeah.
So you
Mhm.
were noticing that women were happy to make donuts while men went to their priesthood meeting.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, that always bothered me. Even when I was in Young Women's, I mean,
But
I
so you were 17 and you're
yeah,
graduating from high school about this time, right?
yeah,
And you're
close
planning
to
on
it.
going to
Yeah.
college, right? Did you go to college then?
Actually, well, that's a whole other story. My upbringing was definitely unorthodox, and I don't mean that in like a religious way. I I was homeschooled for the last three
Okay.
years of high school, um, which really amounted to basically nothing. I had to make efforts to catch myself up later. So I ended up getting my GED when I was 20.
Okay.
And then I went to, let's see, I think I actually did start college at 21. So yeah, like a year later, I was going to college at BYU, Idaho. So,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I didn't technically graduate high school or any of that. It was a weird situation, but
GED's graduating in my book.
yeah, right. So I did graduate at 20, but what I meant was I didn't graduate at like
You
17,
didn't have a
18 from
ceremony.
high school. Yeah. I didn't do any of that. I don't even think that I was like necessarily prepared to do that, but yeah, I made efforts, later to make up for that, and so that way I could finally get to college. So, yeah, I did. I ended up going to college to BYU, Idaho by the time I was
Now, did you
21.
consider a mission then?
I had wanted to go on a mission since I was 14, and I had felt deeply that yes, like I was called of God to do that. And I think part of it looking back now, I think was really just a lot to do with my personality because I was always like I had always felt like I said from a young age that I just didn't care for, you know, how women were perceived. And I was like, well, women can do what men can do, and I'm going to do a mission because I can do it just as well as any man can. And that's kind of my,
Okay.
I think that was kind of part of my motivating factor. And I was also really, really into the church as a teenager. I was an incredibly obedient and good teenager, like no rebellion at all. I did not go through that phase, and
Did they
which
have,
later I found out is a
especially
normal and
for
natural
you,
thing. What's
this,
that?
especially for youth or for the strength of youth, or and did you do any of those things? Did they have any of that?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, the for the strength of youth, like I carried that thing around in my scriptures along with my young women's personal progress and like I always kept those on hand and I would go back and reread those. Mostly my for strength of youth pamphlet. Like that was kind of like my little mini, Bible for my standard, holding the standards. um so yeah, like I used to
It
reread
was
through that
it
a
was the
lot.
readable scriptures.
Yeah, it was. It was the readable scriptures for teenagers so that you knew where your boundaries were. So, yeah,
That's right.
yep, I did
And
that.
so
So,
you're going to college, BYU, Idaho.
mhm,
Then what happened?
yeah. So I'm at BYU, Idaho, still very much with the intention of serving a mission. I was like, I'll do. I'll do a year of school and then I'm out of here. I'm going on a mission. So I did that, and everything was on track. I went back home. I was working. I had people that were in my ward who were like, because I was pretty much on my own. I didn't have any help from parents or anything with cost or anything like that. And my first real job that I got, I didn't get till I was 21, right? Or 20. I was 20. So it was right before I left for college. I had gotten my actual real first job for the first time. I didn't work as a teenager. And so I was trying to save up for college and a mission, and I had people in my ward telling me like, "Hey, super excited for you. Definitely gonna help out with your mission." And I was like, "Awesome." So I knew that I had, the backup that I needed to be able to serve my mission on time and not have to, spend years saving up for it. And yeah, so anyway, it was kind of weird. What ended up happening was I came home and I went through this experience where I kept like bugging my bishop, and I was like, "Hey, have you gotten my papers started?" Because I don't know if it's the same now, but back when I was 21, the bishop had to actually get that ball rolling. He had to do like a certain
Fill out a
he had to kind
form
of open
online or
up.
whatever.
Yeah, and so he had to open that whole thing up so that I could even get online to do it. So it was funny, every Sunday I would just kind of poke at him, and he was really nice about it. And I know I was probably super annoying about it too, but it was funny. So like the one Sunday that he finally did it, he came up to me and he was like, "Hey, by the way, just want to let you know," it was like the first Sunday too that I hadn't actually bugged him. So he came up to me and he was like, "I got your papers open and started for you." And "Oh, I was like, "Oh, okay." And for some weird reason, I just remember feeling like, why am I not excited about this? And I think he could even
Hmm.
sense that I was not as excited as I should have been, because I had been bugging him about it this whole time. And he was like, "Okay, all right. So yeah, like there you go." And I was like, "Okay, I'll go home and do that." Yeah. So super weird. Ended up going to like this um single adult fireside with a couple of friends, and it was all about marriage, and I was super annoyed. But I remember feeling like weirdly happy about, the things that I was hearing, which was so funny. And I mean, who knows, like some of this very well could have been just like my own internal, perception, or I don't know, but like I ended up going home after that and sitting down to start my papers, and I just like burst into tears. And I was like, what the heck's wrong with me? I don't even know. So I
Women.
just, yeah, something. But yeah, I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why this is upsetting me. But I was in that moment, I was like, I remembered like thinking that I needed to like pray about it. And I got this answer that like, no, you don't need to go. I'm very much of the mindset still, like I still believe in, like an afterlife. I still believe in something beyond what we have here. And I do believe that we have, my personal thought is like I think that we have like loved ones on the other side who help us and guide us, and I do believe in deity. So I mean, I don't know, like I don't feel like those feelings came from nowhere for me, because unlike a lot of people in the church where they believe, like, yeah, we have the constant companionship of the Holy Ghost, and like that Holy Ghost is like always talking to me, let me tell you. Like I was like, yeah, that hasn't been my experience. Like I've had like, I can probably count on one hand like how many times I've had like a really distinct, impression that I felt like wasn't coming from me. That, I was like, yeah, that didn't come from nowhere. And so that was one of them for me. And by the time I got to school, I had met my husband um within like that first few weeks.
And so he was going to
And
school.
yeah. Yeah, so I ended up, I was like, well, the papers, I felt very strongly like, no, I don't need to go. But
Now
I was
your
pretty
mission
devastated.
is motherhood and
Yeah, well, and
wifehood.
like, yeah, well, and the thing was is I didn't even really see it that way, because again, like I just never I resisted that mindset growing up. I didn't like those lessons that were like, hey, like your devotion should be to setting up your home. And I was like, I hate this. Like, no, I'm just not that person. Like, and I never have been. I've never been that person that was like, I had friends who were like, I can't wait to get married and have babies. And I was like, I can. that is not on my radar. It's just not my goal. And I mean, eventually, yes, but I was like, I want to do something with myself, you know? And I just remember being looked at funny sometimes where, you know, it was like, yeah, but that's what we're supposed to, you know, the overall feeling was kind of like, well, that's what you're supposed to want. And I'm like, I don't give a shit if that's what I'm supposed to want. Like, I want to do what I want. So, and which, you know, would very much be considered, I guess, like selfish to a lot of people in the church. But, and yeah, I mean, I always did want to have kids. It's just, you know, and a family. It was just that I thought, why should I don't feel the need to do this like right outside of, you know, barely becoming an adult. You know, that always bothered me. And it always bothered me
And,
that everybody got married so damn young.
and so
And I
did
was like,
you communicate that as you were dating, that you weren't really interested in having kids right away, or was that, did those things
n-
come?
not really, because like a lot of the times, like I was really picky about dating. And then there were also like dry spells where I just felt like I wasn't dating. I was probably not giving off like the most, you know, like inviting vibes to, to
You had
men.
something on your
Um,
forehead, like, go away.
yeah, probably like F off, like not interested right now. But yeah, like especially after, you know, it- not going on a mission. And I was like, well, the only thing for me to do then is to work and get my butt back to school because I need to get a degree. So,
Hmm.
yeah, like I ended up going back to school and very much not, I don't think I gave off vibes like that. There were some men that definitely were interested and I was not interested at all. There was nothing there. And I was like, so I was not shy about making that known too. So it was just like, no, sorry, like please leave me alone. Like I was just probably um a little too mean about that in some cases, but yeah, I really wasn't interested. So it just, you know,
You
there are
didn't
a
want
lot
to
of
waste, you didn't want to waste the other person's time. That's
no,
how
absolutely
considerate
not.
you were.
Yeah, we'll say it was that for sure. Like, and I mean, and to some degree it was. It was like, yeah, it's like, why waste my time and your time? I'm not interested. Please leave me alone. Plus, I just had some really like awkward experiences. Some of the people there, I used to call BYU Idaho the University of Mixed Nuts, or like it was like I used to liken it to a bag of trail mix because you get like a lot of raisins and a lot of peanuts, a lot of just like mixed whatever. And then every now and then you get like the occasional M&M. And so that was kind of how it felt to me was like,
Hmm.
well,
Hmm.
there's the occasional M&M here and there. And I've always been like a very picky person. So
Hmm.
I was like, well, I'm not going to date somebody if, you know, like there's no reason to for me. I would go on dates, like, you know, singular dates. And I did that more probably closer to my mid 20s. I think around 23 and 24, I did a lot more dating, but usually a lot of that amounted to just like I would go out with them once and then I was like, well, that pretty much tells me what I need to know. Um, but I had actually like I had met my husband when I was 22 and he was actually set up with my roommate um who at the time she was 25 and she was like I am so ready to get married like I you know cuz
Oh,
in that culture, you know, 25, you know, you're getting
you're
into that
overripe.
that old yeah, exactly. And it's so weird to look back on that now and think that that was an issue. It's like 25. I wish I could be 25 again. Damn. You know, that's young. So, yeah, you know, but that's very much the culture, you know, and that used to always piss me off too. And I remember telling my roommate too, because I never really had like fully that mindset, but I recognize like, yeah, but that's like the overall kind of sense that's given to people in
So they
this
were an
in
item,
this
and you
setting.
got to know him from that angle.
So actually they didn't become an item. So he
Okay.
was our two roommates that that ended up being put in the same um house that we lived in. They had they had friends that they wanted to do like this group date that they hosted at our
Mhm.
apartment. And so they were like, "Hey, if you want, we can set you guys up." And they were, you know, "Hey, we know some boys, you know." And my roommate was like, "Yes, I'm into this," you know. And I was just like, that same, kind of sign on my head where I was like, you know, not
Your,
interested,
your,
F
your
off.
roommate was, give me a +1, and you were like, nope, I'm good
I was
already.
like, I could not care less. Yeah. And I was like, I was perfectly content with being single. And they looked at me and it was funny because she very much gave off those vibes of like, I want this. I want this so bad. And I definitely gave off vibes. I could tell by their reactions because they were all about just like, we will cater to you. We will get you that boy or that man. And then they looked over at me and they're like, oh, do you care, or do you want do you want us to set you up with someone? And I was like, I don't really care. And they're like, okay, well, we'll still get you someone, but like we'll just give you anyone. It's what it ended up being. And so it's
We're
kind of
not
funny.
low
So yeah,
expectations.
yeah, I was like, I don't give a shit. Like I was like, yeah, it's whatever. I'll be here. I'll play games with you guys, but just know that whoever you send my way is not going to be anybody that I am going to spark a connection with. Like, so yeah, come that day. Like they actually were like, we have the perfect person for you. And I was like, oh, this is so annoying. I remember being
Yeah,
very annoyed too, because I was
zero
like, I've
chance
seen
of
this
that.
happen. Yeah, I was like, I've seen this happen dozens of times where these girls that they think that they've picked out the perfect person for you, and they're like, you're gonna love him. And so they were telling my roommate this, and then she was like, "Ooh, can you show me a picture of him on Facebook?" So they pull up his picture, and I was like, "Oh, damn." I was like, "Okay, I should have cared 'cause he's really attractive." So that was my husband. So they set her up with him on this group date, and I was like, "Oh." I was like, "Well, whatever." I was like, "Who cares? He's just one attractive person. Like, I don't even know the guy." So he comes though, like he was actually the first person to get there on that day. And I remember like coming down the stairs. We lived in a little townhome style apartment. And
Mhm,
so
mhm.
I remember coming down the stairs, and he was sitting talking with my roommate, who was very wonderful and sweet. And so I felt really bad because I remember getting this feeling from him. And I just remember the first time I'd ever been in the room with him, I got this distinct feeling like he is a good man. And I stand by that today. Like it was weird. Like it would just hit me. And I was like, I don't know him. And I felt kind of like a crazy person. I was like, I don't know that, like, but it turned out to be true. And I had always just gotten this feeling like he's a good man. And he is, yeah. I love my husband. So I mean, amazing person, which made the whole polygamy thing ever more problematic for me after we got married. But yeah, so we met that way, and I just remember feeling like, oh man, and getting to know him even just a little bit during that group date. I was like, dang it, like, yeah, I really like this
You
guy.
just
Like
missed.
I already really like him. Huh?
You just missed. You could have been the girl, but it was your
I
roommate that
know.
got her.
And that's why I was like, dang it, I should have cared. I should have cared because like these girls meant business, and they really were they really were gonna set me up with somebody if I'd cared. So yeah, the guy that they set me up with, like he was a really nice guy, and he seemed to not care either. He's like, I'm just here for fun. And I was like, oh good, like no pressure. So it was good. But yeah, so anyway, it was funny though, because my roommate really did like him. And I was like, oh man, I was like, this is killing me. But so she had a few weeks later, or like a month later, she was like, okay, I'm gonna text him and see if, like I'm gonna ask him to be my Valentine because it was like Valentine's Day. Excuse me. So anyway, our other two roommates were like, oh, that's so exciting, do it, and so she texted him, and I was like, just on the inside, I was like, oh, this is horrible because I know how badly she wants to get married, and I really love my
Yeah.
roommate, but there's a part of me that really hopes that he doesn't
But you're
text
sending to the universe, say no to her. Say no to her.
yeah. So, yeah, he ended up not texting her back though, because my husband's the kind of person that he does not want to hurt people's feelings. So he will, if it's a situation like that, he'll just kind of try to back out of it, as nicely as he can. And yeah, I know that he did it because he was like, I did not want to hurt her feelings. And so he just didn't respond at all. And so she eventually got to a point where she was like, we hadn't, it's not like we were in constant contact with him. It's not like he was coming over a bunch or anything. So after like a good month or two, I think she just kind of like got over it and was like, yeah, he never texts back, whatever, I'm moving on. And which, made sense because it's not like they had had any encounters more than just that one time. Um, so she was like, I don't think he's interested. And so I was like, silently kind of, rejoicing on the inside, but also feeling really guilty about that because I was like, oh, my roommate's really great. She's a really good friend. So
Right.
I was, well, I'm not gonna, I don't want to do anything to make any sort of move or anything in that direction because I didn't want to hurt my friend. So I really didn't do anything about it. But towards the end of the second semester that we were there, one of my other roommates, she caught on and realized that I did like my husband, that I like, I had a crush on Brian. So she was like,
So
hey,
it's months,
I'll
it's
come.
months later, and you're still saying, yeah, Brian was really nice at that group date, right? And
Yeah,
they're going, oh, you're still talking about Brian?
yeah,
Well, let's
yeah, it was real.
go get him.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, one of my roommates, she was like, I'll come up with some excuses to go over to their apartment so that way we can go see him. And he and his older brother, they were
Hmm.
roommates at the time. And so we would go over and we only
You
went
have to
over
test
maybe
the
like a
waters.
handful of times. Yeah, yeah. But I was like, every time we went over, it was weird too, because I was actually going through some severe depression at the time, and did not feel like myself. I became very like introverted, and very like nervous in social situations. But the weird thing was, is whenever I was around him, I felt very much at ease and I felt like myself again. And so that was really weird to me. And
And comforting.
I was like, yeah, it was. And I was just like, okay, that's to me more of an indication too that like being around him makes me feel better. And ever since we've been married, that's been the situation. He just makes me feel better. So,
Yeah.
but anyway,
How long did it take to get married then?
well, let's see. So I ended up leaving because I was, yeah, I was going through that depression, and I was like, I probably need to be like home and around family and go back to work and stuff. And I had actually thought about staying, and it was funny because when I went in to like hand in my key, um, one of the managers there was like, "Hey, Sheena, just so you know, like we did have an apartment open up at the last second if you want to stay." And I was like, "Oh." And there's a part of me that was like, I should stay and then I could get to know Brian better. But then I was like, no, that's nuts. Like I don't even know him that well. I'm gonna like stick around and hope to get a job and stuff just just to try to get to know this guy that I barely know. So I was like, no, that's crazy stuff. So I went back home, and then like a year and a half went by. I, did some different jobs and things, and yeah, a year and a half goes by. And at that point, on Facebook, I would every now and then like peek to see, how he was doing because we were friends on Facebook, but I didn't
Sure.
like to get on and do that very much because I felt like I was stalking him. So I did see that he had a girlfriend at one point, and I was like, well, that's that, like he's obviously going to get married. Like who wouldn't marry him? And so anyway, but they ended up breaking up, and I had had a boyfriend towards the end of that year and a half as well, who was really pushing me in the direction of marriage, but I was just not ready for that
Not
because
feeling
I
it.
was like, well, we haven't, yeah, I was like, well, we have not been dating that long, and I'm not really comfortable with this. Again, being a little bit out of the norm of like Mormonism, I was not the person that, if you dated me, like you're in for the long haul because I was not going to just keel over and be like, all right, let's get married. It's been a few weeks. Like, ugh. It's like, no, that doesn't work for me. Some people are like that, and if and it works out for them, and that's great. But for me, I was like, no, I am also, that's not my personality. I'm very much a planner, and I like to know for sure something before I make a final decision on it. So yeah, I went back to school, and it was funny because I kept running into him like immediately. Like the first day that I got back to school, um, I went to Walmart to buy some stuff, and he worked there, and I kept he didn't realize that I was there, but I would turn around and all of a sudden he'd be right there, and then I was like, I don't even know what to say. Oh, and I guess I should preface with too that like he and I had talked for a little bit over Facebook, and this was actually while I was dating the other guy. But
Mhm.
he and I talked a little bit over Facebook, and we were just having like a fun kind of like conversation back and forth. And then I think I had made a comment that he had taken it the wrong way because you know how sometimes you'll read things that people will send to you, and depending on how you read it will kind of determine how you thought they meant it. And so he perceived it in just the completely wrong way. I was trying to tease him, and he thought I was being serious and that I said something mean to him. And I was like, why would I? So later on, it was funny because when we started dating, I was like, why did you stop talking to me on Facebook? And he was like, well, you made that comment. It was so rude. And I was like, I was teasing you. I was just joking. I thought we were just having, we were bantering. And he was like, well, I thought you meant it. And I was like, why would I go through all of that, for like a few months talking to you, having fun with you, just to like say something mean? Like, I wouldn't have done that. So anyway, it was kind of funny. So yeah, he had stopped talking to me. So
You
that's
survived
why,
that.
yeah. So whenever I would see him, and I like not even knowing, I had no idea his schedule. I had no idea anything. I didn't even know he still worked at Walmart. I knew he worked at Walmart when I first met him. So I didn't even know he was still at school. I didn't really know that he was at Walmart, but immediately, like the first day that I got back, um, went to Walmart to pick up some stuff, for food and things like that. And every time I would turn around, it was like, oh, there he is. And I was like, and I felt awkward because I was like, he stopped talking to me and I didn't know why at the time. And I was like, my heart was just beating out of my chest. And I was like, do I say something or do I just like go my way and just pretend like, I didn't notice he was there? So I chose the latter. And every time I would run into him, I would just pretend like I didn't know he was there. But it was funny because it kept happening. And at one point I almost ran him over. He was crossing a crosswalk to go to school, so it wasn't even at Walmart. And I was like, oh, trying to hide my face. And I was like, he clearly could just look through my window and see it's me, but he didn't look up. So I was like, my husband's like very tunnel vision, so he'd never noticed me in any of these instances. So it was very funny, but yeah, so ended up, yeah, I was telling a roommate about it, and she was like, why don't you just reach back out to him on Facebook to at least get some closure? And I was like, yeah, that's probably smart. So I did that. And he was like, because I was like, hey, what happened here? Like, where'd you go? And so he responded, and then we started talking a little bit again. And he's like, hey, do you want to? He actually asked me out, and I was like, oh my goodness, finally. It's like, this is great. This is going to be great. So I was like, wow, the person that I've been just like keeping in my mind for the last like year and a half between dating a lot of, dating a lot and like having another boyfriend and stuff. And I was like, okay, cool. So this could finally be a thing. And I didn't know, that we were going to get married or if we would be compatible or anything, but I just knew
Mhm.
those feelings that I had gotten
You had
about
hope.
him. And I was, yeah. So anyway, yeah, ended up, dating and it worked out. And yeah, so we dated for 9 months and then we were engaged for 2 months and then we got married. So almost a full year it took for us to get married. So longer than the standard, but anyway.
In the standard, yeah. So you got
Yeah.
married, and by this time, you hadn't been thinking of kids, but now were you more
Yeah.
thinking of interested in kids yet, or did
Oh
you
yeah,
wait?
definitely. No, I was definitely more interested because by the time we got married, I was 25 and a half and he was 31.
Mhm.
And so there
Mhm.
was like also that kind of feeling of like that pressure of like, oh, like
Biological
if we
clock is
wait
ticking.
too much longer, yeah, yeah. So we were like, if we wait too much longer, like we're not going to have enough time to really have, the kids that we want. But like initially I wanted a large family, but I had always wanted to adopt. I mean, I still hold that
Mhm.
that
Option.
desire to want to adopt. I've always wanted to ever since I was a teenager, but yeah, I mean, I remember telling him at one point, I was like, yeah, it'd be cool to have like 8 kids, but I'm not having all of them. Like I'll have half. So, but I don't know. I
Plus,
don't think we'll ever
it's
have
like
the kids, to be honest.
such an altruistic thing to adopt a kid out of from a situation that maybe you're helping them out, and you
Yeah.
don't have to go through 9 months of pregnancy. It's a win-win.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I've always like, I don't know what it is. It's just, I guess it was always that it just, you know, tugs at the heartstrings to think about these kids who
Sure.
need good, loving parents. And so I was like, yeah, we could do that. But it's also incredibly expensive. It's also really, yeah, like the process is really monotonous and grueling and can be just really, really difficult for a lot of people that I've seen, and there's no guarantee that you'll even get approved. And it's a lot to think about, and we're definitely not in a position right now that we would adopt kids anyway, but maybe a little later down the road when we're in a different situation. But
Sure.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, with where we're living and everything right now too, the place that we're living in, it's 3 bedrooms and we have 4 kids, and thankfully, I mean, like they can double up and it works out
Mhm.
because they're so small. But eventually, it's going to get to a point where it's like this isn't. I mean, we already feel like we're on top of each other in this little space that we're in,
That's
but
right. When you think about
um,
triple bunk beds, it's really time to move.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And honestly, like we were gonna go buy a house. My husband had gotten a promotion at his job. And we were like, great, we can finally afford a house because we are in southeastern Idaho. And back in like 2015 to 20, we got married in 2014, super broke, got to a point where we were finally, comfortable enough to be like, yeah, we can afford a house down here. And then 2020 happened because that's exactly when we were able to, we thought, afford a house. And then immediately all the house prices went. So we were like, okay, well, we're officially screwed. So we're going to have to do something else now, plan B. So yeah, that's kind of been where we've been at right now anyway. But yeah, it's
Still
it's kind of
looking.
funny. So we did exactly. So yeah, we did start thinking about kids. And that was when that whole, Mormon brain kind of really switched on for me with like the all the things I had learned and been taught. And I think for me it was more about like, hey, for both of us actually, it was like, hey, if we just start having kids, like the Lord's going to bless us in our efforts and everything's going to be fine, everything's going to work out. I think a lot of people, excuse me, hold on. Excuse me,
Will even maybe
something in
someday
my throat.
help you be okay with the fact that Mormons practice polygamy in the past. If you're a good,
I
faithful mother.
something, yeah, it was more that like I was just thinking like we'll be able to get out of like this super broke situation that we're in. And it's funny because we used to attribute like, oh, with every kid, my husband got this raise and promotion. But
Right.
then it was like even after we stopped having kids, it was like, well, how do we attribute this raise and promotion? Because we also stopped paying tithing. Like,
Mhm.
so it's like, I guess we didn't need to do those things in order to get blessings and, or to have
Yeah,
good
there
things happen in our lives.
there are billions of
People.
people that experience ups and downs of life all over the
Exactly.
place.
Exactly. And it's kind of crazy to think about that contradiction as well because, even the church, like leadership will even say that to like cover their own bases, of hey, yeah, well, oh, yeah, the Lord will bless you so much if you do all these things, but also you're still going to have trials. But also you're also going to see evil people who are really successful and have all these things going on that seem like blessings, and just so you know, like that's not from God. And like there was a lot of that where it's like, well, then how the hell do you really define any of this? Because that
And you
doesn't
have
make a lot of
agency.
sense. Yeah, and it's like some of the
Yeah.
people who are getting these blessings and these perks in life, it's like it's not like they necessarily even worship God or believe in God. So, and they're also not bad people. So, I mean, it's
Mhm.
how do you explain all that away and
Right.
still make it make sense in Mormonism? But yeah, anyway, so it was like we used to attribute a lot of that to just, oh, we were doing the right thing and therefore we
That's
got
right.
blessed. So anyway,
And you mentioned
kind of
stop paying tithing. You stopped paying tithing.
yeah.
When was that, and why did that happen?
Um, well, so okay, sorry, we didn't stop paying tithing. I probably misaligned some things there, but we didn't stop paying tithing when we were having kids. But after having our fourth kid, because at that point, when I was pregnant with our fourth, and that was back in 2021, I was pregnant with her, and I had already been just kind of at that point. I think we were like reading through the Old Testament at the time or something, or we had just started to. And I've always disliked the Old Testament ever since reading through it the first time.
It's a stumbling block.
Because I was like, yeah, because I was like, my gosh, it's so sexist and it's so violent and it's horrible. And I was like, this Old Testament God sounds like a terrible being, and I was just like, and my husband's like, I just think we don't understand everything. But I'm like, okay, I will grant you that. I don't understand everything about this, but I have a really difficult time with the way these things are worded and like who the hell worded them like this? And it's like, and why? And why? And I was just like, it very clearly like again puts women in their place. And so anyway, it was just I was like, I just hate reading through this. So we were starting that again and it really didn't help because I was like, yeah, well, the main reasons that I have issues with the church or questions that I'm trying to find answers to, or because, you know, like I constantly feel like I'm in this position of being less than. So that was
And
very
here it is in
frustrating. So
scripture that you're less than.
yeah,
Scripture is
exactly.
telling you that you're less than.
Exactly. And the only part of the scriptures that I ever felt good about, where I didn't feel like that was the message, was reading through like the four gospels of Jesus, you know. And so I never really felt, you know, that he talked to women that way or treated them that way. I always felt like he just had like this, you know, this loving
Accepting.
kindness towards everybody. Yeah. And
Mhm.
acceptance. Yeah, exactly. And so then you get to like you get to Paul, and then it's like right back to square one. And I was just like,
Back
nope.
to women shouldn't be talking in church.
Yeah, it's like you shut the hell up and let your husband do all the talking, and you know, you're just a woman, so you know, keep your mouth shut and don't try to lead men. And you know, and in my mind I was like, I'm sorry, I don't know how any Christian religion can work around that, like how they explain around that. I don't think you can circumvent those words, um, unless you completely change them, or if something came up where it was like, hey, yeah, the translation for this was so completely ass backwards. You know, it's like I don't know how else how you would circumvent that. So yeah, that was always an issue for me. So yeah, after having her and getting to the point last year, and it really was mostly last year, but that I really was deconstruct, or I should say it was by about 2022, because I had her at the end of 2021. So by, yeah, about 2022, at this point, I'm like, I'm really starting to just like dig in. And I'm like, okay, let's just lay this whole polygamy thing to bed once and for all. I'm going to figure this out, you know, and I got really determined about it. So I started really going through scripture. I started going through the gospel library. I was being a good little Mormon and staying in the confines of that gospel library. And I had read back in like 2015 or 16 or whenever it was that they started putting those stupid essays out. I had read already the one about polygamy there. And I was like, okay, you know, trying to still kind of work that out in my head, but still feeling like it was just really feeling like it was coming up short, even though they finally did admit that Joseph Smith had between like 30 and 40 wives in that essay. And I was like, I was even a little shocked by that. But I was like, well, good on them for like trying to come out and like be more forthright about the information. And I literally thought that this was the church being like, hey, we just found this new information. And then later to find out that they've been sitting on this information for years, since the beginning of the church. And so that was really a big that was really a big strike for me, and you know, against the church, because I was like, no, it's not I would have been able to more easily forgive if it was like, yeah, we just barely found out all this new information.
Right.
And it really wasn't that. And in my mind,
So
they
honesty,
purposely,
honesty
yeah,
must be
honesty's
one of your
huge for me.
values.
Yeah, ironically, you know, taught by the church. So yeah, that's a huge thing for me, and I feel like that's pretty true of most people. Nobody likes being lied to. Um, so yeah, it was just, to me that was a really big deal, and I was like, I don't know how you can explain your way around that, and it's hypocritical in nature. That and learning about like second anointings, that was another really big one for me, and that was actually
How did
something that
you
I think
learn about second anointings?
I learned that from watching interviews on Mormon Stories podcast with John Dehlin. So yeah, different people that had come on and talked about it. Um,
Hans Mattson, I
and I was
know, did one story
who?
about it. Hans Mattson
Yeah, I
and
think that was one of
Tom
them that I had watched.
Phillips. Tom Phillips was in
Yes,
another interview.
yeah, and then I think the first time that I had learned about that was actually an interview that he did with she was the daughter of like a 70 or something. Oh God, I cannot think of her name right
Lila
now.
Tuller.
Yes, it was that one. It was Lila Tuller, and she was the one who had mentioned like her dad had come home, and she was like, he wasn't
That's
supposed to
right.
really talk about it, but he kind of
But he would
just
act like
made these
I can do
comments.
this because I have had the second anointing, but don't tell anybody. But
Yeah,
I can do whatever I want.
yeah, exactly. He's like, I can even like commit adultery if I want, and I still have my place in heaven. And I was like, okay, you know, without using too many expletives or anything. In that moment, I was like, mother, like, I was like, there's no way. There's just no way. Like, this is ridiculous. So I was like, and here we go again. It's just another one of those very secret things that happens only for the people at the very top. So that way they can get away with whatever the hell that they want, and feel like they're justified or whatever it is. And yeah, that actually I think was a bit of a turning point for my husband. And I mean, I kind of mentioned it in the video that I posted this morning on my channel, but because I've had people ask about my husband, and I don't really like to speak for him on his feelings or thoughts or anything, but that was something that was notable when I would bring up this stuff to him. um, I was like, I just watch this, like just watch these interviews that have been done about people who have gone through it and had the second anointing and stuff. And he was like, okay, yeah, that's an issue for sure. For him, he was like, yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. And so I think for sure with that, and like the things that I was telling him about polygamy and about, just how Joseph Smith actually was as a person, like his personality and his, behavioral patterns, I was like, there's
Right.
just no way. I was like, and I feel like it's been, oh, sorry, I keep bumping my desk here, but I feel like it's been in very recent years too. The church has tried to, the leadership has tried to make it seem like, oh yeah, like, you know, the prophet, he wasn't a perfect person, and they try to like, they try to kind of prime people with like these ideas so that it can be a little bit
There's
easier to,
two
huh?
two 21st century books about Joseph Smith. One is Rough Stone Rolling, and the
Yeah,
other is Making, and that's by Bushman. And then
right.
there's The Making of a Prophet by Dan Vogel. And they
Oh,
both
I
say
need
the
to read that
same things.
one.
It's almost the same book, except for Dan Vogel says stuff like, and so Joseph Smith must have been a pious fraud. And Richard Bushman says, but Joseph Smith's still a prophet. Or
Yeah,
even though these things happened, the church is still true.
yeah,
And so they come to different conclusions, but they say the same things about church history, the
yeah,
early church history,
e-
and Joseph Smith.
exactly. And I feel like the church is finally starting to actually like embrace more of like the Richard Bushman narrative, where it's like, okay, so the cat's out of the bag and we need to keep membership. And so,
God has to work through
yeah,
imperfect men, but
yeah. And then,
why not imperfect women, right?
well, that too. And also my thought on that too was like, I told my husband, I was like, I'm sorry. Was God just up there like, who'd be a really great prophet? That guy who constantly wants to cheat on his wife. Like, I'm sorry, out of all the people on the whole damn planet, that was the one guy that did the best. He was the only one who could do a job as good as was done to
It's almost
restore
like
his
God
true
bet
church.
Satan
Like,
again. Like didn't God bet Satan or whatever, Lucifer or something in the Old Testament about whether Job could be mistreated and still be faithful? It's almost like another bet happened. I can turn that
yeah,
guy into a prophet. You want to bet?
yeah, yeah. And so to
How
me,
else
it's
can
just
you
so
explain it?
ridiculous. Yeah, it's so ridiculous on its face in my mind. I'm like, I'm like, I'm sorry, you can't put lipstick on a pig. I mean, you
Yeah.
can, but it's not going to make the pig prettier. So, I mean, it's just,
And so this is like 6 months
it,
ago. These things are sort
yeah,
of like
oh
shaping
yeah,
up.
like, so this was within, like I said, around like the beginning of 2022. And that was actually probably my most difficult year, because that was when I was really like, okay, I'm not finding the answers I need in this gospel library that's supposed to be giving me all these great answers. And I've been doing my due diligence. I've been saying my prayers and all the things that I've been taught to do. And so I finally was like, I need to look at, I need to see some resources that have actually been compiled by human beings that are all in one place, that aren't going to make me search through like the Joseph Smith papers and try to monotonously go through that crap. My husband tried
And
that, and he gave up pretty quickly, because he's like, some of the stuff in there is just stupid shit, that it's like a receipt for something, or and you're trying to go through it all. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I eventually turned to books like you know um Ghosts of Eternal Polygamy, and what was the other? Oh,
um,
I'm
In
trying to
Sacred
think of the other.
Loneliness.
In Sacred Loneliness. That was actually the first one that I really turned to, and I was like,
Right.
okay, safe space, because this guy's still a believing, like, active member, safe space, you know. And so I
Right.
granted myself that to be able to read the, and you know, I appreciated that Todd Compton had taken and done, he had done the first book where he kind of puts like his own input into that, but then the second book where it's just purely just like the letters and the documents and things like that. And so he has no like inserted commentary in there. So I hadn't, I mean, I didn't go through fully either of those because I was trying to avoid like spending money on these books, but I would get the sample versions of them, and they actually let you go through quite a lot. The samples that I got on the Kindle app or whatever. So
Mhm.
it let me go through like a good 2/3 of both of those books. And I was like, this is just enough alone for me to know, you know, what the hell was going on, and to know that this is like, at that point too, I was trying to be more of like you know, the more nuanced Mormon, where I was like, okay, somehow this could still work out. But I hadn't figured out how to divorce certain ideas from Mormonism yet. And so for me, it was still all very much like intertwined. And I felt like it was very
And
all
at
or
the same
nothing.
time, you have your fourth infant that
Yeah.
you're caring for. So you got
Yeah.
three older toddlers or kids or whatever, and you're caring for a
Yeah.
baby as well, and you're doing all this
Hmm.
stuff. That's got
Yeah.
to be stressful, we'll say.
Yeah, it was really stressful. And subsequently, like, I ended up coming across, you know, the CES letter, and because I had been watching Mormon stories, I had dabbled a little bit in like watching like Nuance Ho with Cara Burrell and like Exmo Lex. And I remember like watching through them and trying to be like, yeah, well, like I can kind of see where they're coming from, but um still trying to like grasp at straws at like why they were wrong about certain things. And
Right.
but
Like
through their
I could
channel.
see, you could see where they're coming to their conclusions, but you haven't
Yeah.
concluded that yet. Mhm.
No, not at all. And so, which is also why, you know, like I said in my video that I posted today, like I try to give my husband some, well, maybe I didn't say this, but I should. I try to give my husband like some room and space in his own journey and process, because he's not at the same point that I am. And I don't know if he will come to the same conclusion or point that I come to. So it's just such an individual journey. But yeah, I mean, like I just remember like in their channels, you know, hearing about the CES letter, and I was like, what the hell is a CES letter, you know? So I pull that up because you can get the free PDF, you know, on the internet. And so I pull that up,
Right.
and I'm of course, because I'm very like laser focused in on the polygamy mostly at this point. So most of 2022 is mostly just me researching polygamy. And then as I come to understand and know more about Joseph Smith, then I'm like, wait a minute, there are other problems here. And I start looking into those. But mostly I was laser focused in on that polygamy. And so I immediately go to just like the polygamy parts, and I'm feeling like even more justified and feeling fired up and being like, yeah, exactly. Like all the points, you know, he's hitting them all, and that's correct, you know. But then I start realizing, it was actually really through the CES letter that I start like peeking at other things, and it is just rocking my world, and not in a great way. You know, I'm starting to just like my heart is dropping into my stomach, and I'm starting to feel like that sense of hopelessness and anxiety and fear overcome me, where I'm just, you know, I'm reading through things that I'd never considered before, you know, especially concerning things like, you know, the flood in like the Old Testament with Noah and things like that. And I still have not read 100% through the CES letter. I kind of dabbled in it, and I've gotten to a point now where I feel like I'm comfortable going back and I could probably read through it. I just don't really have the time to right now. But at the time, it was more like I was just kind of peeking at different things and feeling like that, you know, the pit of my stomach, just like ultimate despair. And I remember crying myself to sleep a couple of nights in a row over it,
Hey,
and
hey,
just kind of
Sheena.
silently upset. Yeah.
So I have an idea. I've been taking
Hmm.
up your time. It's Easter Sunday, and we've had a great
Okay.
discussion, you know, getting to meet
Yeah.
you. And I forgot I was gonna at the beginning, you know, let people know that, you know, Maven would have been here. except for
Oh, yeah.
she's recently caught a fever or some
Yeah.
illness after
That's
her big adventure last week. And so we'll tease that someday Maven's going to come and tell what happened, what her experiences were on that. And
Yes.
then this way, maybe we'll close and we've crescendoed actually, and we're going to like cliffhanger, like a
Oh, yeah.
serial, a
Yeah.
show, a TV show.
Yeah.
Who shot JR? And we'll include in the description links to the media that we've mentioned, whether it's books or podcasts and things like that.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about your channel and your experiences around that maybe next
Sure.
time. That way,
Yeah.
we can get the most out of this and let Maven share in on the conversation. So does
Yeah,
that
that'd be
sound okay to
awesome.
you?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I would
That
love I'd love
sounds
to
good to
hear
me. I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and be sure to tune in for the next episodes that we have, and like and subscribe to this, and share it to your friends. And Sheena, it's been great chatting with you. I think you're a wonderful
Thank
person,
you.
and I
Oh,
hope
thank you.
people go to your channel and enjoy it, and subscribe to your channel as well.
Thank
And
you.
it's Easter. I'm going to try to post this afternoon really soon. And so everybody have a good Easter, have a good day, and have a good rest of the spring. Bye-bye.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Gene.